So, dear professors, guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here with us today. I would like to welcome you all to this panel organized by Presidency of Turkey, Directorate of Communications. I would also like to express my gratitude to everyone who took part in bringing us together here today. At this panel, we will be discussing global challenges and their governance in various aspects. I am very happy to moderate this panel, to meet and introduce you four brilliant and experienced experts. As announced in the program, we will have four presenters today. We will start with Ellen Wasylina, who is currently the president and founder of the Trocadéro Forum Institute. Ellen has spent her career in France as a well-known and appreciated expert in geopolitics and geoeconomics. Then we will have Karim Elgendy, who is an urban sustainability and climate expert based in London, an associate fellow of Chatham House, and a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute in Washington. Then we will have Dr. Kaan Kutlu Ataç. He is an assistant professor of international relations at Mersin University and a visiting lecturer at the Turkish National Defense University. Dr. Ataç works on strategy, national security and intelligence. Then we will have Dr. Öner Akgül from Kırşehir Evran University. And Dr. Akgül is an associate professor of international relations, again, who works on theory and practice of interstate war. Each presenter will have 15 minutes, and they will give their take on the panel topic. I will kindly signal you when you have 5 minutes left and 1 minute left. We will not be able to take any questions from the audience during the presentations, but instead we will have a break after the panel, and I hope that the panelists would be happy to answer if you have any questions during the lunch break. Once again, thank you for your participation, and Mrs. Wasylina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you so much. I'll try to say a few words in Turkish. Sayın hanım efendiler ve beyefendiler. I hope I did that all right. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, first of all, I want to thank the Directorate of Communication of the Presidency of Turkey for inviting me to this forum to contribute and to speak with you and with my colleagues today on this panel. I am most honored to be here and think back fondly on the very first time I came to Turkey, which is in 2013, and the marvelous friends and colleagues that I have met and stayed in touch with. Please accept my sincere condolences to those families of the victims of the recent earthquakes. As a former director of environment of a French city from 2008 to 2011, I saw firsthand the importance of sustainability at the city level, the place where we all live. Following many publications, speeches on sustainability, the organization of a Green Economy Forum in Algiers in March 2021, and my recent keynote speech in the first 4Revs Summit in Kenya on the 4 survival challenges: food, water, energy, and climate, and to follow up on my engagement in this very strategic domain, I recently founded the Trocadéro Forum Institute in Paris, 2022, to train the next generation of leaders in sustainable leadership and diplomacy. This speech is a great opportunity for me to speak about the importance of putting sustainability at the heart of our decision-making process, be it in government, private sector, or the nonprofit sector. Climate change is changing the way we live, the way we invest, the way we operate, the way we govern, the way our citizens live and what they expect from us. As we come out of the COVID pandemic, which brought a lot of national security issues to the fore, we realized that globalization had also created varying dependencies, as seen in the recent war in Ukraine, the earthquakes in Turkey, the ongoing migrant crisis, and even the recent strikes about retirement reform in France. So let's look at how climate change will impact global security. In the World Economic Forum's 2023 risk report, the top 10 risks in 2 years and 10 years contain 5 climate risks and 6 climate risks, respectively. In 2 years' time, we will see natural disasters, the failure to mitigate climate change, large-scale environmental damage incidents, the failure of climate change adaptation, and natural resource crises. I would also like to mention that in 10 years, there'll be bigger challenges such as large-scale migration, natural resource crises, and erosion of social cohesion and societal polarization. Even though the WEF, or the World Economic Forum, places geoeconomic confrontation in 3rd position in 2 years and 9th position in 10 years, I would like to start first with geopolitical challenges, followed by geoeconomic challenges, and finally with the most critical challenge of all, energy, natural resources, and water. So we are witnessing a geopolitical shift in power, which is putting pressure on fossil fuel producing countries, OPEC and OPEC+, which have supplied energies to the industrialized world, starting with Azerbaijan in 1847, but must now transform their energies into clean energies in the blink of an eye. It's a new Cold War based on energy in a race to save our planet. While this is certainly a very noble and necessary goal, it will once again divide our world into those countries which have the technology to transition and those that do not. Not only do they now need to transform and produce technologies for fossil fuels, they need to transform their entire economies and invest in R&D and create new industries, new cars, new digital technologies, which will inevitably result in new geopolitical security challenges. Because of these necessary and legally binding transitions, the world will experience many power shifts and challenges at the geopolitical level in historic fossil fuel energy providers or exporters, such as Saudi Arabia, Iran, UAE, Qatar, Russia, and Venezuela, where the greatest reserves of oil and gas are located. Let's look at 2 major impacts on climate change has on the power struggle and the effort to maintain or change global order through the lens of defense spending globally and at national and local level in terms of political legitimacy. So how is defense spending related to climate change? As stated above, the risks indicated will require national defense investments, which we hope in the near future will be greener, but that is another topic for another discussion. So if we look at the defense spending, the Ukraine war was a wake-up call for many countries in Europe, where the trend was sizing down, reducing defense budgets, and certainly before the terror attacks on November 13, 2015 in France. It was our 9/11. It must be noted that budget increases in military spending were the highest in Europe, 13% in 2022, the largest annual increase in total European spending in the post-Cold War era. Ukraine increased its budgets by 640%, or $44 billion, or 34% of GDP. And Russia increased hers by 9.2%, or $86.4 billion, or 4.1% of GDP. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, world military expenditures rose by 3.7% in real terms in 2022 to reach a record high of $2,240 billion. Global spending grew by 19% over the decades, 2013 to 22, and have risen every year since 2015. Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a major driver of growth in spending in 2022. The top 5 countries accounted for 63% of global military spending in 2022. The United States, 39%, China, 13%, remain the 2 largest spenders, followed by Russia, 3.9%, India, 3.6%, and Saudi Arabia, 3.1%. The Asia-Oceania region and the combined military expenditure of countries in Asia and Oceania was $575 billion. This was 2.7% more than 2021 and 45% more than 2013, which has been an uninterrupted trend since 1989. The growth in spending in 2022 can mostly be attributed to increases in expenditures by China, military budget estimated at $292 billion, and then India, which was the 4th spender at $81.4 billion, and Japan, $46 billion, which accounted for 3/4 or 73% of regional spending. So has World War III already started? Will some alliances change as we discussed in the first and second panels on Ukraine and recoding the transatlantic security architecture, where some countries may move to consolidate geopolitical and geoeconomic power positions on the global chessboard. I will quickly pass over to the geoeconomic challenges. The real test, of course, is geoeconomic. As we're witnessing in the COVID pandemic, trade came to a halt, many people lost their jobs, and many countries went into debt trying to prop up large swaths of the economy. Businesses, even though many sectors were completely shuttered, as tourism, hotels, and restaurants. And our supply chains were put to the test. And the same will take place as we attempt to green our economy, to transform our businesses to be more resilient, less dependent on external, faraway suppliers, as many countries like France attempt to reindustrialize and create more industries and jobs at home. It is now the time to implement policies based on economic social governance, or ESG, norms and business practices that reduce risk and increase value. But how much will this transition cost? And it will be seen as in the EU is investing, I'll just go very quickly through this, 1 trillion in the European investment, the Sustainable Europe Investment Plan. In America, they've launched the Inflation Reduction Act with $437 billion of spending. And then, of course, in China, who is investing massively, spending $546 billion in 2022. Now, are we going to face not only military wars, but protectionist wars? Will those who have and developed the technologies necessary to implement the transition be willing to share the patents and the intellectual property, or the IP, with those nations that do not have them? Will it be more like it was with the vaccines, where the vaccine rate in the rich nations was very high, and the rate in the emerging economies was in the single digits? So of course I don't have time to tell you everything I wanted to tell you today, but of course human security will see a displacement of refugees because of climate change. The current estimates stand at 21.5 million people per year, or 1.2 billion climate refugees by 2050 who would be displaced as agricultural crop patterns change, resulting in famine and starvation, and will ultimately destabilize entire nations and regions. Very quickly at food security. As our climate changes, access to fertilizers and grain imports will become strained, like we saw with the current war in Ukraine. And Ukraine had the capacity to feed 400 million people. And of course, thanks to Turkey and the United Nations, the Black Sea Grain Initiative opened a safe maritime humanitarian corridor. So there was a lot of information there that I can tell you. But of course, many countries are seeking to be self-efficient in food productions. But have the international organizations created at the end of World War II failed to prevent wars, migration, starvation, pollution that can separately or together destabilize a country, as we are now seeing in Sudan? And I'll end there. Thank you.
I think it's working, yeah. Next, we will have Karim. The floor is yours.
Çok teşekkür ederim. Davetiniz için teşekkür ederim. Bir hikayeyle başlayalım. So, I will tell you a story about a neighboring Middle Eastern country, which I will not name right away. That Middle Eastern country experienced a drought, really bad drought between 1998 and 2012. Temperatures rose, as they do with climate change. It had less rainfall, a bit less surface water as well. And conditions became quite dry in that nation, especially in this northern eastern region. Experienced, according to some estimates, the worst drought it had in 800 years, 8 centuries. So that's back when the Seljuks, the Abbasids, and the Mongols were out there and ruling that part of the world. Obviously, with the drought, you get failed crops, and you get less food production, you get less food security, and you get less work for farmers who don't have anything to do at that moment. The humanitarian toll was known, but the toll on animals was less marketed. 85% of cattle died privately owned cattle died. And 800,000 families moved from the rural areas that they lived in to outskirts of cities where they're looking for jobs. They don't have skills for those jobs. So they're farmers, cattle herders. And they moved to outskirts of cities. They didn't have jobs for those. Cities didn't provide the services for them either. And the government of that country also had its own problems. It was already weakened. It had authoritarianism, sectarianism. It was struggling economically and socially. And those cities that they moved to didn't really provide any services to them, didn't really help them get the jobs. So it was really a fire, really waiting for a spark. Social discontent already there in many of those cities. So does anyone know what that country is? Any takers? Any takers on what that country is? Yeah, no one really knows that side of the story. The country was Syria, and that spark that ignited the fire was the Arab Spring. I'm not trying to say here that the Arab Spring was caused by climate change. That's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is the stressors that were created by climate change and its impacts just created momentum for this to go on, for this to continue. It created additional fragilities, additional societal preparedness for things that could escalate further and end up being what we all know. And that's basically how climate change is currently being framed within the security and policy establishment, especially in the West, as a threat multiplier, something that will make security worse, an underlying background. And that threat multiplier term is now commonly accepted widely. It started within a security think tank or a educational institution in the US, and has been accepted now by everyone, the think tanks and academia. And NATO, in its Climate Change and Security Action Plan last year, put it front and center. Threat multiplier. This is what's going to govern at least how we think about security and climate change. So what are climate change impacts on security? I'm sure many of you are asking. The problem with climate change is that it's kind of unconventional, and that in itself is a security risk. So normally, security people, I'm not a security person, I'm a climate person. Normally, security people think of a threat or a security risk as something that is caused by one entity, usually, conventionally, at a certain point in time, in a certain way. The problem with climate change is it has the potential to cause multiple chronic developments over an extended period of time globally. And that, in and of itself, is something that we're not really prepared to contain, not prepared to manage. And it isn't just the physical impacts of climate change that are the problem. The temperature increase, the humidity increase, the changes in rainfall or snowfall, the variability of those as well, or the sea level rise. These tend to be long-term things, like end of the century, middle of the century, where we really see those manifest themselves fully to become, in and of themselves, dangerous. Sea level rise going up to 2 meters, for example. By the end of the century, that's dangerous, but not yet. What we are looking at is the secondary impacts of climate change, not the physical ones, but the secondary ones. So what is climate change? What are those things I mentioned, like increase in temperature, reduction in rainfall? What do they do to agriculture today? Not tomorrow, not at the end of the century, but today. What would they do to agriculture or tourism? And also the tertiary level after that is what would they do to security and stability? But also more urgently, and this is perhaps what others are looking at within the security world, is how are they interacting with other stressors, existing stressors, things that are actually undermining stability and security. And that interaction, I think, is where the most urgent attention is currently needed. So I'll mention a few examples. So food security is particularly a critical issue. It's often at the center of those interactions, especially in places that will get less rainfall. So around the world, we'll get more rainfall because there's more evaporation, because temperatures are increasing, more evaporation, more rainfall, except for this lovely area of the world, the Mediterranean. Something about its geography, it ended up being the place where it will get less rainfall. In the east of the Mediterranean, we could get up to 25% reduction of rainfall. especially in southeast Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, and that region. And that's the worst case scenario. In the Western Mediterranean, we could get up to 40% on the Moroccan Atlas Mountains. Climate migration is the second point. It certainly will exacerbate additional stressors caused by other forms of migration that we're currently having. Impacts on jobs and livelihoods, people losing their jobs. In tourism, some places are not going to be nice to go to. So they're not going to get as much tourism as they used to do. So what happens to those people employed in those jobs? So the livelihoods. And of course, the GDP, both in agriculture and tourism, as an example, and economic growth in general. And of course, resource competition. Some resources will become scarce. And if they become scarce and demand continues, then there'll be resource competition. It could be within the country, it could be between nations. And our own response, the global response, national responses to climate change in and of itself is a risk. How are we responding to it? Sometimes the response is called climate action, doing something about climate change. And sometimes that response is just every nation for itself, every nation wanting to maintain its power in the new world, in the new climate world. So the changes, for example, like the energy transition, which is a response to moving away from fossil fuels, going to renewables and other forms, cleaner forms, less emission forms of energy, that transition in of itself will have winners and losers. And of course, some readjustment of that energy balance will lead to some energy insecurity in some places of the world. And that change of the balance of powers between producers and consumers is a security risk. And then, of course, you have these new areas of strategic competition, perhaps between great powers, but also between other players in the world, not necessarily the greatest powers, where we have those new supply chains emerging, as in the case of renewables and batteries. Those new supply chains creating new dependencies. This balance between fossil fuel producers and like OPEC and OECD countries is not going to be the most important one. You're getting something else. You're getting new dependencies, for example, on China, where most of the refinement, manufacturing, processing, and sometimes extraction of minerals, important minerals, rare earth minerals, happens. And those new dependencies are an area of geopolitical competition or strategic competition. You have those new shipping routes emerging in the northeast and the northwest through the Arctic, and that certainly undermines other parts of the world, like the Suez Canal, the Panama Canal. Competition over natural resources in the high north, in those areas where it becomes less cold, less ice. You could go up there and mine for useful things. That's not a climate action as such. It's not a positive response to climate change in an attempt to stop it, but it is certainly countries like Russia trying to make the most out of that current situation. In certain countries, like specific fragile states, all of this will get worse, get more pronounced, put it this way. So climate change could, in a way, exacerbate existing fragilities, existing weaknesses, existing stressors and other sociopolitical dynamics are already there and make them worse. So this competition of resources internally in a fragile state is certainly an element that could undermine that country, and it could lead to additional political instability. But what is actually causing this is that you're getting simultaneous impacts in those fragile countries. Remember those simultaneous, all at once, chronic impacts of climate change that can happen all at once I mentioned earlier? So we could get, at the same time, economic conditions getting worse, livelihoods getting worse. Some of those countries are living standards are already marginal, already poor, already limited. And if those get any worse, God knows what's going to happen. Food production gets worse, and food security gets worse, more dependence on imports. And as we now know, dependence on imports is bad because disruption of the global supply chains can really disrupt basic food security, as we had seen with the Ukraine war. Fresh water could become less in some countries, not all. And the climate change will cause disease vectors to change, so you're getting new diseases in new places. And worsened energy security. All of this at once could lead to that political stability that I mentioned, competition for resources, and can, it's a big if, potentially lead to failed states, increasing extremism and or authoritarianism, potentially conflict, and of course, inevitably, migration. So what do we do about this? We fix climate change. I think that's the most basic response. We try and deal with the root of the problem. We do what the science tells us to do in terms of mitigation, dealing with the basic issue of emissions, halting it, limiting it to the limits of 1.5 degrees increase in temperature. As a little anecdote, if the Pentagon or the Department of Defense, American Department of Defense was a country, it would be the 30th largest emitter of carbon. But the defense industry is obviously very resistant to any changes. We're not going to reduce our emissions to limit our operational flexibility. But of course, it's not just about mitigation. There are multiple tracks that need to be addressed in parallel and at the same time. Finance is critical because those developing fragile nations are not going to do anything without any resources, so we need to finance them. We need to provide loss and damage for any impacts that they have incurred as a result of climate change, which they did not cause at all. They're not responsible for it. So loss and damage, finance, and additional adaptation support. That additional support is technical, but also financial, for them to deal with the things that they can deal with. Loss and damage for the things they cannot deal with. Compensation for the things that they cannot deal with. For example, island states that will be inundated with the water. That's the thing that they can do. It's compensation for that. And we also need to avoid the pitfall of securitization of the whole thing. So in the security industry, there's this thinking of climate change as a security threat, and gets a lot of criticism as being a very blinkered view of climate change, a very limited view of climate change. And we need to avoid that pitfall and avoid that securitization. We need a more integrated policy response that includes diplomacy and includes a focus on development as well as the defense and security component. So in a nutshell, I think we need to think about climate change as another layer of this emerging complex world we're living in. And that other layer will interact in many, many ways. Some of them are known, some of them are less known, with other stressors, with other dynamics that are undermining the security of our future. So, and I will end with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karim. So what I understand from the first two presentations is like the world is facing some sort of a crisis of global governance, right? And the academic literature has been discussing about this crisis for some time now. But we are not moving forward, but we are moving backwards in terms of improving the global governance mechanisms. So let's see what Professor Ataç, Dr. Ataç is going to say about this, the changing nature of security in the world, maybe global security.
I think I'm going to add some darker points of view that my, let's say, esteemed colleagues already depicted the world that we are living in, and we are living forward to the really it's a dangerous world. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to quote from the very famous paragraph from Charles Dickens, A Tales of Two Cities, the first paragraph. But intentionally, I will omit the positive way, and I will insist the negative point of view, famous writer Dickens, and it says, it was the worst of times, it was the age of foolishness, it was the epoch of incredulity, it was the season of darkness, it was the winter of despair. So therefore, I'm also move up through the very darker side of the global events. And I'm start with the press conference that held on last January 24, 2023 in Washington at National Press Club. So the atomic scientists, the very famous, let's say, academicians that grouped after the 1949, that they tried to understand how the global issues worsening in the Second World War world order. So they declared that we are moving through the doomsday clock and we are just approaching to doomsday time for 90 seconds. So therefore, we are counting on seconds to the catastrophe that we are going to face in the next, probably next in the very near future. So it's a doomsday clock depicts the very darker picture that we have in the next decades, according to board of bulletin. So we are going to move the apocalyptic traits reflected by the clock include politics, weapons, technology, climate change, and pandemics. So until the next decade, we are going to get some incredible and unprecedented uncertainties in the global governance. So the newly appointed Chinese Foreign Minister, Mr. Gang, in his first press conference after appointing, declares that the world is going to have some catastrophe because of the United States is leading to very unprecedented uncertainties in his foreign policy. So in southern China Sea or in the Pacific area, the clash of the giants in the next decade is expected by very prominent scholars in this academic literature. So the speech that I'm going to deliver in the next few minutes, that I'm going to depict a very interesting concept to my, let's say, studies that explains that we are living in a global geopolitical tsunami. So I literally use this tsunami in climate change, environmental issues, political issues, and military issues. So the global governance is expecting to fail to understand that we are going to have in the next very near future. So since yesterday, all panelists emphasized on one issue, that after Russian invasion of Ukraine, starting from actually in 2014 and in the last years, with the great military impact on the eastern border of Ukraine, we are going to have the great shifts in political understanding and geopolitical understanding of, first in the continent of Europe and spreading throughout the global effects. So I suggest that geopolitical fault lines is so much that the concepts as such competition, uncertainty, power struggle, and the great power competition have pushed the concepts such as cooperation, world warfare, peace to the background. So when you look at this prominent news outlets headlines that we are going to have some kind of catastrophe through use of atomic weapons. Russian President Putin recently declared that Russia is going to deploy warheads in Belarus. So in one of his latest Congress hearing, Chief of Staff of United States, General Milley, urgently declared that he needs double times military and defense budget to encounter China's threat in global level. So the problem that we were going to have in this political and geopolitical tsunami is affecting specifically the region that Turkey is located. It is extended from the north to east and the east to west fault lines. Turkey is located in the epicenter of these global threats that depicting these environmental and neighborhood areas. We have got the 360 degrees conflicts that affecting Turkish domestic and foreign policies. The main issue that the next decade we are going to have is how we are going to save the future of humanity. How do we tackle the problems that the global governance is going to give us some answer, coherent answer, and concrete solutions to the problems that my colleagues already indicated, that starting from the climate change, migration, economic problems, the COVID-19 pandemic process that we are still has its negative problems. So Russia's military intervention in Ukraine caused shifts and aftershocks, leading to a period of increasing uncertainties and challenges in international system. The current international system we have right now is often referred to as an American world order, is being challenged and maybe transitioning to more multipolar world order. Two powers that China, namely China and the United States, has a key role shaping in this new world order are the United States and China, with signs of two-block structure emerging. Before we will lose this opportunity that we are going to save the humanity in the next future, we have got some kind of window of opportunity is narrowing, counting the seconds, doomsday clock. So what we have to do in the coming years, we are going to deal with the Western Bloc led by United States, and the unprecedented human and military powers of China is going to clash each other, either in the Asia or Africa, or just we are going to witness in the continent of Europe. The old continent is some kind of power struggle base for these two titanic world powers. So, as a suggestion, in a sense, the assessment, we are in a period of significant political challenges with the potential major shifts in international system and the new emerging of new power structures. So the current geopolitical tsunami is narrowing as I said, the window of opportunity for a common human future. The current political tsunami is narrowing the common benefits that we are going to have in the next common decades. What is required to tackle these huge problems? We have to require to reduce the risk of escalation in this time of unprecedented global danger. So I suggest that before closing this window, and we are going to move in a widely balance of power shifts, I try to understand from a different point of view that the balance of power, according to traditions or classic realist point of view, we have some kind of pendulum that swinging from the one side to other in a wild way, and we have to get some adding two dimension, backing forward and up and down swinging of this pendulum. So three-dimensional approach to global governance that we are going to need to understand this three-dimensional pendulum system instead of balance of power. So equilibrium is going to be replaced the balance system. Equilibrium is going to be the key word to understand the global challenges. Three-dimensional effects of the swinging of the pendulum need to be put the political agenda in international organizations or the UN or in the power competition problems in this huge geopolitical tsunami. So therefore, we are going to follow up which sides, either backwards or forwards or ups and downs, the pendulum is going to be equilibrium, has got some kind of equilibrium points in the next decade. So the two-block system, multilateralism in this swinging sides of the pendulum is going to give some answer, whether we are going to have the solutions for the common human problems, or we are going to have doomsday clock is some kind of final seconds until we are going to have the opportunity.
So you finished early, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ataç. The panel is turning into a kind of a very pessimistic portrayal of global governance and world politics. I hope that, Öner Hocam, you have something more positive to talk about. No. So the floor is yours. Go on, please.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation of Presidency of the Directorate of Communication. I'm very glad to be here because we have so much discussion with our both panelists and also my dear colleagues. So we had talked on climate change, environmental problems, and the security problem, and now it's time to technology and industrial revolutions. When our friends first invited me, and I had told on that I believe that there is a strong relation between industrial revolutions and power shifts in international system. Because you know that we are theoretically focusing on, specifically in the structural theories, world is changing. World is changing from unipolarity to multipolarity, multipolarity to bipolarity. And we always try to explain the dynamics of international system. For the theories of international relations, it's important because if we can measure the structure of international system, then we can predict the actors' behaviors. So what kind of international system what we are living right now is so important for the theory of international relations. The basic problem, or my research question is about, we were living in first, second, and third industrial revolution, and we can measure and predict the polars of international system. But now, in the fourth industrial revolution age, everything is changing step by step. So we were easily measuring the hard power or material capacities of states, and then we were deciding that who is great power, who was middle power, who were the small powers. So in such an environment, we could divide the ideologies of international system together with the hard powers, and then we were saying that yes, there's a great circles, middle circles, and small circles. So we were saying that this is multipolar, this is bipolar, this is unipolar. In theory, most scholars has rigorous discussions on this issue. For example, some scholars, some schools specifically saying that the unipolarity is ongoing, okay? The multipolarity is illusion. Another school says that no, unipolarity already ended, okay? Now we are in the age of multipolarity. And the other one say that the world is divided by two camps, and we are living in now in bipolarity. To say a right thing, to say a correct thing, so we have to measure the existing capacities of state, but how we will do it in the first industrial revolution, in the fourth industrial revolution. Let me give a brief explanation on what was the basic variables for power measurement in first and second and third industrial revolution, and then I will come back to fourth industrial revolution. For example, in the first and second industrial revolution periods, we were talking on mass manufacturing, okay? And also the humanity, and the first time, applied the first industrial revolution's drivers to military field, and they produced their security powers. And in the third industrial revolution period, in the second industrial revolution period, we were talking on chemicals, new energies, and electricity, and then applied them to military fields. And we witnessed the world's most bloody First World War, and then the Second World War. In the third industrial revolution, we witnessed satellite systems and also invention of internet and militarization of space, okay? So we can include the invention of internet in the third industrial revolution period, not the fourth one. Here, in the first, second, and the third industrial revolution period, we witnessed the population was the basic determinant of power construction. Because the population was on the heart of material power construction. Huge masses populations and small populations. Huge populations has two different options. The first thing, huge populations were working in industries. And the second point, military participation rates, okay? So it was a good thing. So we were witnessing huge armies, and specifically in Cold War, we saw lots of soldiers and high production capabilities. So that maybe there have been an unemployment problem, but the masses were producing the military weapons and something else in a long time. So in this period, in first, second, and third industrial revolution period, we see that total population, urban population, military personnel, military expenditure, iron and steel consumption, and energy consumption was the basic driver of power construction. Who has so much? So we were saying that those days were great powers. So high population was, again, a significant thing. In 2012, in Germany, there was a fair about the technology. So for the first time, they put the name. This is Fourth Industrial Revolution. The Fourth Industrial Revolution was a unique thing, because in the Fourth Industrial Revolution period, the human was going step by step, okay? So machines and internet and physical, biological, and the other new types of tools and instruments was becoming step by step, replacing the human existence. So there are three different drivers of this fourth industrial revolution. I will not give a detailed explanation, but the physical, digital, and biological. If we're talking about the security and power, so I am mostly focusing on physical and digital ones. For example, smart factories eroding the capacity, eroding the existence of population, okay? Smart factories has a connection via internet or another ways, so they are producing, they are planning, and in some case, you can design something and they are producing with the other countries, smart factories. So as a result of this process, there is no human, okay? It had been started, I think, in Germany in automotive sector, and now its number is increasing step by step. So in the first, second, and third industrial revolutions, basic driver, population, was eroding in industry. And the second point, military robotics. Because, as we have mentioned before, the military participation rates are significant to measure the power of states. If you have so much soldier, if you are paying so much money, if you invest military expenditure so much, so you can be considered as middle or great power, okay? But in this time, military robotics, specifically the humanoid robotics, replacing the human soldier step by step. Not now, but in the near future we will see, I think. So, for example, Samsung has a robot, SGR-1 robot. So it worked in Korean demilitarized zone. So its price is $200,000, okay? So just one soldier could be more expensive if we compare it with a military robots. And I am sure that we have some experts on this issue, and maybe we can give the detailed explanations. So when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution's bringings to power construction, drones, autonomous weapons, militarization of space, biochemical weapons, nanotechnologies, and also 3D printers are important things. Because if we talk about the theories in military-industrial complex, the military was completely different or completely depending on the state infrastructures. Now, individual people can create some guns and design it and can create in 3D printings, and as a result of this, each one can be a fighter, okay? So in this context, we can say the problem of autonomous warfare is creating such kind of things. In the fourth industrial revolution, it's completely different than the other industrial revolutionary periods. Deadly technologies are very cheap, and you can acquire very easy ways, okay? So it's producer, it's civilians, most case. It was promoted by the internet advertisements. So it's maybe very dangerous. In the fourth industrial revolution, is not states. You know that we are sometimes talking on sharp power, or we are living in a post-truth age, and we are talking on disinformation and something else. But today, not only states offer individuals in diverse ways harm to others on grand scale, okay? Just one state's national can organize a protest in another state, okay? There are strong examples on this issue. So they can create a kind of not only disinformation, and also they can organize some and facilitate this while you are sitting on your chair and just you are watching this, okay? So emergence of indistinct universe of hackers, terrorists, criminals. So the basic problem here, it's not, you cannot struggle with the classical methods on this issue, okay? Because of that reason, some scholars argue that security state is back, okay? One more time, security state is back. So this is all the drivers of the fourth industrial revolution. So when I am reading something on the technological revolutions, I found a concept about creativity. So we always say that creativity is a good thing, but in some case, they say dark side of creativity can create some kind of threats. But at the same time, while the individuals create new threats against the state security or individual security, at the same time, states are developing more professional methods. So even if there is negative effect or negative creativity, but at the same time, there is some positive creativity issues. So in this age, if we say that in the near future maybe, if fourth industrial revolution erode the role of population on power production, we can talk on the middle powers or small powers who invest or who embraced more than the other states to Industry 4.0. It means that they can produce so much power, okay? In such an environment, we can expect a huge grid power can occupy a small country, but at the same time, a small country can resist unprecedentedly, okay? So in this age, we cannot argue that we completely measured power so we can observe the power shift easily. Because we don't know how will we add the humanoid robotics to this power formula, okay? Maybe you know that the most common power formula is the correlates of war projects SyncSecure, for example. And in SyncSecure, only things the tangible ones. You cannot put the intangible ones. And in the fourth industrial revolutions, the intangible drivers may be more than the tangible ones. For example, population is tangible, okay? Energy consumption is tangible, or military expenditure is tangible. But hyperconnection, maybe we cannot measure so easily. So if you want to observe what kind of world we are living in multipolar or unipolar, or maybe it can be a modest discussion after the last industrial revolution. And the last thing, I just want to present my findings, and then I will stop it. I think that I have 3 minutes. Yes, that's right. The effect of smart factories is declining the effect of population. The effect of unmanned vehicles, land, navy, and air, changing the power construction of countries. So declining the effect of military personnel in this case. The effect of new energy technologies, declining of all resources. So, for example, if you are a middle power who are controlling the petroleum, natural gas, or oil, something else, may change in the near future. So the petropolitic may be an old research field, or remain as an old research field. And in the near future, I expect the effect of humanoid robotics can decline the effect of, again, military personnel. So small but high-tech armies can be the constructive points of the next generation armies, I think. So most states in the world today investing so much. What about the other points? There is an anti-protest on this issue, specifically the autonomous warfare, and there is pros and also anti-campaigns about it. The most significant one, stop killer robots. So most countries are signing this, but we should go back to classical theories. This is a security dilemma. If everyone are investing such kind of technologies and you are rejecting such kind of this is a security dilemma, and there is no decision makers can put this option, okay? So the gap is increasing. The countries who invest or who embraced the fourth industrial revolution's stuffs so much, and the other one. And not interestingly, the old grid powers are investing more than the other one, and also some middle powers just like Czechia and Netherlands and also Belgium are investing so much, including Turkey and Mexico. So I think it's enough. Ismail looking at me, so I think that I filled my time. Okay.
Yes, but you can, if you need, I can give you.
No, okay, okay, that's it.
Okay.
Maybe question and answers time.
Okay. So before starting the panel, I thought that we won't have much time to have a quick Q&A session, but right now I think we have 10 minutes. If you have anything else to add, you can add. If you have anything to comment, I can just turn to the floor. If there are any questions, any comments, maybe something more optimistic about global governance, we can take something. Yes, go on, please.
Thank you very much. The panel was very interesting. Martin Sokolov from the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, but it was very bleak. I mean, pretty dark prognosis. It was kind of like, I felt that the movie Titanic was more optimistic, and we know how that ended. My question would be to Mr. Karim Elgendy, because your presentation pertaining to climate change and the threat multiplier it is, in a way it's very interesting that, you know, this is a factor that changes the entire environment that states, international organizations, private actors, corporations, that everybody operates, because it actually objectively changes, terraforms the Earth, as you pointed out in your parallel with how it worked in Syria as a catalyst for the risk factors. My question would be, in your opinion and in your research, what are the active measures we can take in terms of forums or formats that can best address climate change, but with a twist, on a regional specific level, sort of not take the topic to the entire global format, but is it more worthwhile to consider it on developing regional formats specifically tailored to this topic? And if there's a historical approach you can take to it, or if there's enough data, what is the success rate when this has been tried? Thank you very much.
If there is any more questions, we can take one or two more questions, then we will have an answer round. So we have a gentleman there. Okay.
It's from Turkish Police Academy. Thank you very much for the presentations. I have one question and one personal story to tell. The question is, when we talk about this global governance of the age we are living, I think this unipolarity, multipolarity, or bipolar world, these are the concepts of old times, because that is very state-centric, the concepts are very state-centric. I mean, we are living in a non-state actors, the world of a non-state actors, and especially in technology and energy and environment, I think non-state actors, multinational companies, NGOs, they really have important and determining power, and I think it may help to change the things into a positive issue. And especially the international organizations, they have good capacity building efforts in these issues. How do you comment the role of these non-state actors, actually? This is a general question. I'm open who can take, I mean, he or she can answer. And the personal story to make it more optimistic. I'm really optimistic for the future. I think it was 3 weeks ago, we were having dinner at home with my wife and daughter. She was 5 years old. Suddenly stopped the glass that she has during our dinner, and it was broken. And we said, don't, it may happen, and clean it, and we will continue our dinner. And me and my wife cleaned the glass, we put it into the trash in the garbage. And she was still very sorry. And I said, what happened? It's very normal. Glass is breakable. You can drop it, and it is very normal. She said, okay, father, okay, that I understand it's a normal thing, but can we put this glass not to garbage, but to the recycle bin that we have in the street? This is 5 years old daughter, and I was shocked, actually. This is not my world. They have the kids, the younger generations, they have this awareness about environment, about this global governance. They are living in a new world, and they will create it. And I think we can trust in this young generations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So you are optimistic about the future generations, then we share that hope with you. So shall we take one more question, or shall we just answer that? Do we have any other questions, comments, stories? No? Okay, thank you. Then we can have the answer. Shall we start with Karim?
Oh, thank you for the great question. So I just want to emphasize one more time that there is no causality established between climate change and instability, violence, or conflict. There is correlation, especially when it relates to the stressors and the increased risk of those things happening, but no direct link. And there are some small-scale conflicts that have happened in Africa between herders, pastoralists, and farmers over water, but nothing bigger than that. And as a matter of fact, in the MENA region, which I will focus my response on, there are more incidents of collaboration over water security and over water scarcity than incidents of conflict, which is bizarre. So you have a problem, a resource conflict, but you don't get the conflict, you get more collaboration. And if you take out one specific country on the Eastern Mediterranean that has bombed several of its neighbors over water, you could find that most of it is actually collaboration, which is bizarre, given what we think could happen as a result of this resource conflict. So it's not inevitable, but what I'm trying to describe here is a situation where the entire globe is changing very slowly, but almost inevitably, in a way that our responses to security risks in the past may no longer work. We're facing a new world, and that new world and our response to the new world are changing the background. And we have to consider that as a layer in everything we do, including security. So on action, what can we do? So I think collaboration is specifically a good entry point. National states have been encouraged by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to voluntarily do something. A lot of developing countries are doing very little, and they're allowed to do very little by the agreement. But establishing a framework for collaboration specifically can be beneficial because it reduces that competition. If every country needs to do the same things, every nation becomes an island, and it has to deal with climate change as if it's reinventing the wheel. Well, in some cases, in certain regions, we have the same impacts. So you get the same forest fires in the entire region where Turkey is. Same forest fires, but none of them have enough helicopters or enough firefighting capabilities. So finding a framework for collaborating by pooling resources, for example, could be one way of adapting to the increasing risk of forest fires. Sharing knowledge on how to deal with water scarcity. How do you do more efficient irrigation, for example, is another way of establishing that framework for collaboration. So pooling resources, sharing knowledge, and generally reducing the background competition that can emerge from this, from climate change and its impacts is, in my view, the easy win. It also has an additional benefit of reducing tensions. If we're having conversations, especially that we can have collaboration over climate between countries that don't have good diplomatic relations with each other, as I've seen firsthand, then that means climate can become a form of diplomacy. We could reduce the background tension using climate as an entry point. But it is much easier said than done. This idea of collaboration is really amazing, but whose collaboration is it? Who's establishing the framework for collaboration? Whose forum is it? Who's hosting it? And what I have found, especially in the MENA region, that it really depends on who's hosting the event, who's inviting who, and who shows up, who doesn't show up to those fora. That kind of determines the dynamics and the direction in which the collaboration goes. Sometimes the collaboration goes to advance the interests of the host. And there are, in the climate world, believe it or not, there are different directions. Which way do we want to go? So collaboration, but I don't think it's easy. But I think collaboration is one way of gaining traction and doing more than we currently are doing. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, do we have any of our panelists volunteering to Murat's question about non-state actors? Would you like to add something? Okay.
Thank you for your question. I want to give an answer because I have a daughter and the same age with Professor Murat. So, in our mostly discussions in Congress, we are mostly talking on the role of state for the long time. For example, in the last maybe 15 years, I have a vocational past. So for the maybe 20 years, we are talking on what is the role of state. All members of each theory has different explanation on this issue. We cannot say that non-state actors are unimportant in international politics, but it's a very personal view. I think that state has never gone. State was always there, and now maybe state is back. Because together with the pandemics, we witnessed this. The most things was organized again, the state, but at the same time, the non-state organizations is very effective on decision makers. Okay, we cannot say that the non-state ones, non-state actors in international relations, and also individuals, unimportant, but the state is still standing there. And in the second part of your question, Professor, if we are talking about there is no national interest, we have no need to talk on the polarity. But if we are talking about still the international politics is based on the national interest, specifically the security interest, which is, you know that this is very realist, maybe old types of theories. If we are talking about this, so we always wonder what type of world that we are living in now. Because if most states in the international system believe that we are living in multipolarity, it means that, according to some others in realism specifically, it means that if we are living in multipolarity, it means that middle powers has more flexibility. It means that territorial crisis may easily turn into militarist conflicts. Okay. For example, if we are expecting, if we want a kind of stability in international system, some structural realist maybe wants that bipolar system was the best one. And if the world is dividing into two camps today, the Western Alliance or the Eastern states, just like Russia, China, or any other thing. So we talked about bipolarity, and they want to see their stability, and they will say. So yes, this is the divergence among the IR scholars are very good, because all of them are contributing different fields of international relations. But I think the polarity and analysis of polars, measuring the power, still a kind of starting point of measure or predict the international system. For example, the indexing is a method, so soft power index, for example. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Öner Hocam. So I would like to thank to our panelists for their contributions. We ran out of time, and I would like to thank to our audience for your patience for being here with us today. So now it's time to end the panel and go for the lunch break. Thank you.
The best part.